Jonah, Part 3. Nineveh, an Assyrian city, is located in modern-day northern Iraq. It was built by Nimrod, the great-grandson of Noah, who was also responsible for building the Tower of Babel. Wanting to reach God in heaven to pull him off his throne, to create a tower high enough that if the earth were flooded again, they could rise above the flood. Nineveh was also famous in the ancient world for worshiping Ishtar, the goddess of fertility. Also known as the Queen of Heaven, she instituted the changing of sexes. Her priests were called the Kurguru, meaning transgender or non-binary. Nimrod was her son, and he was also her husband. Just 3 generations earlier, God gave Noah a rainbow as a covenant promise to his people that he would never destroy the world for its sin by a flood ever again. It is said that Ishtar had the rainbow in her eyes and that her priests wore dresses and engaged in homosexual activity. Ishtar had the power to change sexes. Over the last 30 years, the rainbow has become the moniker for homosexual and alternative lifestyles. Satan and his fallen angels are angels of light, so therefore it would make sense if Ishtar had rainbows in her eyes, since eyes are prisms that refract and bend light. Now, don't get all bent out of shape, folks. This is just my own personal thought. I don't have any scientific proof that the rainbow was actually the apple of Ishtar's eye. So now I'd like to focus back on Jonah and draw some parallels between Jonah and Jesus in the scriptures. And away we go. In Jonah chapter 2, verse 4, there's a storm. Then the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. All the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his own God, and they threw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. Now we're going to go to Mark 4, verse 37. There is also a storm, and Jesus is in a boat, just as Jonah was. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat, so that it was nearly swamped. So now we go back to Jonah chapter 2, verses 5 through 6. But Jonah had gone below deck, where he lay down and fell into a deep sleep. The captain went to him and said, "How can you sleep? Get up and call on your God. Maybe he will take notice of us so that we will not perish." In Mark 4, verse 38, Jesus as well sleeps in the boat. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" Now on to verse 10. This terrified them, and they asked, "What have you done?" They knew he was running away from the Lord because he had already told them so. And in John 18, verse 35, Pilate replies, "Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you have done?" In verse 11, the sea was getting rougher and rougher, so they asked him, "What should we do to make the sea calm down for us?" And in Matthew chapter 27, verses 22 and 24, begs the same question of Jesus. What shall I do then with Jesus, who is called the Messiah? Jonah became the scapegoat in this scenario. He was lifted up and thrown into the sea. The sea represents all men. Jesus takes the place of both goats during the Day of Atonement, also known as Yom Kippur, or the ritual of the scapegoat. There are 2 goats, the immolated goat and the scapegoat. The immolated goat is sacrificed right then and there for the wrath of God for the sins of the people. The scapegoat is taken outside of the city. All of our sins are put on that goat. That goat is released somewhere out of our sight. Jesus was killed for God's anger and God's wrath for all of our sin, like the immolated goat. And all of our sins were placed on Jesus like the scapegoat. He was crucified outside of the city, just like the scapegoat. As we read on in verse 13, it states, instead of throwing Jonah overboard, the men did their best to row back to land, but they could not, for the sea grew even wilder than before. In Luke 23, verse 20 through 21, Pilate tried to free Jesus by offering Barabbas, but couldn't. Wanting to release Jesus, Pilate appealed to them again, but they kept shouting, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Then, in John chapter 18, verse 39, "But it is your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at the time of the Passover. Do you want me to release the King of the Jews?" They shouted back, "No, not him. Give us Barabbas." So the devil had this world so deceived, so backwards, that they chose to spare the one that was guilty and to punish the one that was innocent. Now, on to verse 17. Now the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. And in Matthew 12, verse 40, it states, "For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." This concludes Jonah Part 3.